Hello, Center Church. We are actually in the second of 2 weeks on the book of Lamentations, which is really coming at an interesting time considering the amount of wars that have been going on. Not only war, but even in our own country, the number of mass shootings and violence that's occurred over the last several weeks. Not only that, we've gone from COVID to now hearing about other diseases and viruses that are out there that are causing confusion. Even in the midst of that, we're coming out of COVID, which has been so hard for so many, as pain and hurt and loss occurred in a time when we weren't able to get together and be with friends and family how we usually would. Some of those divides caused even greater pain and heartache as we walk through this season. And so it seemed really fitting that we step into the book of Lamentations. And I was so grateful for the job that Andy did kind of introducing us to the book and talking through the first 3 chapters last week. And as he said, it's a series of 5 poems. Chapters 1, 2, and 4 are all acrostics, 22 verses each starting with one of the letters of the Hebrew alphabet. Chapter 3 actually breaks that pattern and goes through the alphabet twice, and yet still follows the same pattern as being an acrostic. And then we get to chapter 5, which is really all over the place. There's no pattern like that we see in the other chapters. And if you were to watch the Bible Project videos, one of the things that they say that's going on there is that the writer is so overwhelmed from what he had written in the previous 4 chapters and the poems that had been written, that he's just bursting forth with emotion. And as you read through that chapter, you can see that to be true, but also as you come to the end of the chapter, it actually ends in a very hopeless way. And so we see that the writer is just so distraught from the pain and the heartache and the things that they've been going through. And Andy did an excellent job talking about the kingdom of Israel and Judah and how they had been taken over by Babylon, and then had a revolt by one of the kings, and then Babylon came back and did a siege for 2 years until finally Jerusalem fell. It was a city that they thought could never fall, and yet it fell, and then it was just utterly destroyed, and they just ripped it apart to where you can't even find some of the original stones of the temple that Solomon originally built. And so we see that happening in 2 Kings 24 and 25. And this pain, this judgment, this hardship they went through was because the Israelites had turned away from the Lord. They had lived a life of sin and idolatry for a long, long time. And as we see in chapter 4, not only was it the kings that led them astray, that became arrogant, but it was also the prophets and the priests who led them astray, and then their own sin. And what we see in those through chapters 1 through 3 that Andy pointed out to us and did a great job explaining was that despite the suffering that they were experiencing, they were able to find hope in God because he is true to who he is, and his steadfast love can be trusted. And so if God was willing to take them through the judgment that he did, then he's true to his word. And so he must be true to his word about his love as well. And so there's such great hope in that. In those verses, chapters 1 through 3 culminate in verses 20 through 26. The steadfast love of the Lord never ceases. His mercies never come to an end. They are new every morning. Great is your faithfulness. And he goes on to celebrate God and what he's done. And these verses give them hope. They remind them that God will be true to his word. And so Andy did a great job pointing that out. And then he also talked about that there's 3 reasons that we lament. And that's what I want to spend some time talking about this morning as we finish chapters 4 and 5. Those 3 reasons are: 1, it's a way to process emotion. 2, it is a form of protest. And 3, it is a way to voice our confusion in the midst of hardship and difficulty. And so we're going to take a deeper look into those 3 reasons as we look at chapter 4 and 5. But one of the things we do represent and we recognize as we finish the book of Lamentations is that, you know what? It doesn't end with a neat, clean little ribbon tied up and tidied up. The book ends in a very distraught way. And so often we find that life can be that way. Life doesn't just finish easy. Things just don't end up nice and neat and clean. They often are messy, and they often have loose ends, and they're difficult and they're hard. See, this side of heaven, things will not fully wrap up. And this leaves us with the ability to lament. And the first reason that we see for lament is a way to process emotion. See, lamenting is walking through a journey. See, and when we journey through our emotion through lament, it actually can bring us back to reality and clarity on our current situation. But at times we have to get all of that out. We have to vomit all that out in order for us to be brought back to reality. And so as we look at chapter 4 and through those verses, and if you read it, we're not going to take the time to do that now, but if you were to read through that, you're going to see them contrasting. You're going to see them talking about the pain and the difficulty and the hardship that they're going through. They even say that it would be better to have died by the sword than the hunger that we're experiencing in the midst of the siege. Those who once feasted on delicacies perish in the street. See, things have been upside down. They've been turned upside down because of the siege, because of the judgment of the Lord. See, people who were once compassionate all of a sudden were hard and cruel, and it's seen in the mothers. The writer says the Lord gave full vent to his wrath. He poured out his hot anger, and he kindled a fire in Zion that consumed its foundations. See, they are fully under the wrath of God. See, and then we go into chapter 5, and the author even more gives his emotion and talks about the desperation that he's in. In verse 3, he says, "We have become orphans, fatherless. Our mothers are like widows." You understand that in Bible times, the reality was to be an orphan was one of the worst things because there was nobody to care for you, nobody to watch over you. And the same to be a widow, because women had no rights, they had no land, they had no way to make ends meet for themselves. It was the lowest possible place for them to be and to live. And so they are in complete desperation, and they're sharing this emotion through Lamentations and through these chapters. But see, as they give all this emotion, as they pour all this out, as they pour everything out that they're feeling, they come back to recognize in verse 19, "But you, O Lord, reign forever. Your throne endures to all generations." See, God is still sovereign, and as they express their emotion, they come back to the reality of who God is. Our lamenting is processing emotion eventually leads us back to the truth of who God is. See, there was a time when I was going through a lot of heartache and a lot of pain and a lot of hurt. It was because of my own sin. I remember being so mad one night, and I went out for a walk, and I just started screaming and hollering at God and just letting it all out and just pouring it out and pouring it out and pouring it out. And then all of a sudden I finally came to the end of myself. And I remember it was dark, it was night, it was late, and I look up and I see the stars. And I remembered that God is God, and that he is still in control, and that he had a plan for my life. But it was through the process of releasing that emotion and processing it that I was able to come back to that place. So not only is lamenting a way to process emotion, it's also a way for us to protest our situation. You know, the reality is God is totally just, and he operates in goodness towards us. But the truth is that when things are totally upside down and they're not how they're supposed to be, and as he says in chapter 5, verse 1, "What has befallen us? Look and see our disgrace." He talks about the fact that they've got to pay for the water they drink. They've lost everything. They've been totally rejected. They're now ruled over by slaves. Things are as bad as they possibly could be. Their princes are hung up by their hands. There's no respect for the elders. Young men are made to compel and do work at the mill instead of being out being warriors and being the men of Jerusalem that they were supposed to be. See, they were in this place and they're protesting. They're saying, "God, do we deserve all this? Is this right? Is this okay?" And so at times when we lament, we let out our frustration that we don't think that our situation is fair. See, but the reality is God is big enough. He's God, and he can handle us not agreeing or being frustrated with maybe what we're going through. Even Job, as you read that book, that's what Job did. In verses 1 through 6 of chapter 27, he says, "And Job took up his discourse and said, As God lives, who has taken away my right, and the Almighty who has made my soul bitter, as long as my breath is in me and the Spirit of God is in my nostrils, my lips will not break falsehood, and my tongue will not utter deceit. Far be it from me." But you see, at the beginning of that, he says, God who lives and has taken away my right. He's protesting against God. Here's the beauty of God. Because he loves us, because he's our daddy, in the midst of that process, he will eventually bring us back to the truth. He will remind us that he is God and we are not, that he is just and we are not, that he is good and we are not always good, that that's who God is. And he did that with Job. Remember, he said, remember, I'm the one who put all this into existence. And it humbles us and draws us down. And so lament is a way to form and to give our protest in the midst of really difficult and hard situations. The third thing that lament allows us to do is it allows us to voice our confusion. Towards the end of chapter 5, he says, "Why do you forget us forever? Why do you forsake us for so many days?" See, in the midst of this, the writer remembers that God is a God of hope, that God is a God of steadfast love, and that he is there for them. And as a result of that, he's facing some confusion. See, in the Old Testament, the term for God and in the law and all that they would know would have been steadfast love would have been used 196 times. In the Psalms alone, steadfast love was used 127 times. And so you have this author who's saying, God, you're supposed to be the God of love. You're supposed to be so caring, and yet this is so hard and it's so difficult and I don't understand. And although we have sinned and although this is wrong and we deserve this, it still is confusing. Because not only did they see and know the steadfast love of God, they also knew the promises that God had given them through the prophet of Jeremiah in chapters 30 and 31 of the book of Jeremiah that would have been just before this. "For this is the covenant that I will make with the house of Israel after those days, declares the Lord. I will put my law within them, and I will write it on their hearts. And I will be their God, and they shall be my people. And no longer shall each one teach his neighbor and each one his brother, saying, Know the Lord, for they shall all know me, from the least of them to the greatest, declares the Lord." And he says, "For behold, days are coming, declares the Lord, when I will restore the fortunes of my people, Israel and Judah, says the Lord." See, they had these promises. They knew what God had said. They knew that God was a God of steadfast love, and so their circumstances, their situation was leading to such confusion because they were so overwhelmed. And so lament gives us that place, that space to be able to express our confusion when our current reality does not match what we believe about God. See, they had those promises, and they were trying to hold to those. They were trying to cling to those. Man, I don't know. Sometimes I can feel that way. No, I've never been under siege. It's never been as bad as they were facing. But see, at times I feel this way. I know that God hates sin. I hate sin. I want it gone. I want to get over it. I want to work through it. I want to be totally sanctified. I want to be able to do what's right. And at times I just can't. And I pray and I cry out to God and say, God, give me the ability to overcome this. And I still fall. I still fail. And it brings confusion because I'm like, God, help me through this. And so I voice that confusion. And what's interesting is chapter 5 ends in such a hopeless way that tradition tells us that what would happen is when they would read Lamentations aloud, they would never finish with verse 22. They would actually go back and read verse 21 again. So verse 21 says, "Restore us to yourself, O Lord, that we may be restored. Renew our days as of old, unless you have utterly rejected us and you remain exceedingly angry with us." So it ends so hopeless. And they would actually go back and they would say, you remain exceedingly angry with us. Restore us to yourself, O Lord, that we may be restored. Renew our days as of old. See, they wanted to end on an up note because the book was so difficult. But the truth is sometimes life is that hard. Can you relate to that? Can you understand how hard that can be sometimes? Because God, you are good. God, you promise to care for me. God, you say you are with me. But sometimes it doesn't feel that way. And this is where lament takes us. But as I move to close, I want to share something really hopeful with you, that our lamenting tells us about ourselves. It tells us that we still trust God to be our dad. Think about it. You know, when my kids come to me and they express their raw emotion to me, I am torn inside me. Why? Because I want to fix their situation. I want to make it all better. But you know what? When that happens, I'm so thankful. Because you know what? It means they still believe I'm their dad. They still believe that I can help them in their situation. I'm their dad, and they still believe that I love them. And so it has them coming to me with such energy and such emotion and being willing to share their deepest heart in the most raw, most unfiltered way. And I am grateful for that, because it reminds me that they still believe that I love them and I care for them and that I'm there for them. See, friends, what you should be most concerned about is when you no longer want to lament to God, when you no longer want to share your emotion and your hurt and your pain with God, because you know what? In those moments, it's probably when you become so calloused and hard because of your hurt that you don't think God any longer is going to listen, that God no longer cares. But we share our lament, we share our pain with God because we believe and we know that He cares. We believe and know that He is there for us. Aubrey Sampson in her book says, and this is how, somehow, even in our darkest, most grievous laments, there's hope. Because we don't lament to avoid. We lament to the God who wants our laments. As we lament, we join in a chorus of those who have gone before us, those who have wrestled with sufferings, reality, and come out, not unscathed, but still proclaiming God's goodness. That is the beauty of the life and work of Jesus as we are reconciled to God, that even when all hope may seem lost, it isn't, because God is with us. And this is why we lament, because we have a great high priest who has passed through the heavens, Jesus, the Son of God. Let us hold fast our confession, for we do not have a high priest who is unable to sympathize with our weaknesses, but one who in every respect has been tempted as we are, yet without sin. Let us then with confidence draw near to the throne of grace, that we may receive mercy and find grace to help in the time of need. Hebrews 4:14 through 16. We have a God through Christ who can handle all of our emotion, who can handle our protest, who can handle our confusion. And with gentleness, He will care for us. He will watch over us. He will draw us back to Himself, because you know what? He is our dad. We are His children. And so we lament, we wait, and we keep looking to our dad through Christ, our Savior. So we lament to process our emotion, to protest, and to express our confusion. And right now, we're going to stop the video. And what you're going to do, you're going to take a few minutes. And you're going to take some time to write a lament. You can do it on your phone, a piece of paper, or pen if you have it. Maybe you're in a particularly hard season. That's what I want you to do. I want you to express your emotion to God. I want you to share your protest, and I want you to express your confusion to Him and write it in a prayer. But I want you to end by focusing on the steadfast love of the Lord, focusing on what He's done for you in the past, knowing He will do it in the future, focusing on His promises in the Word and what He will do for you in the future. So take time to write a lament. Now, maybe you're a person that you're not in a hard season right now, and you're like, I don't have really anything to lament about. I want you to just take a moment, and I want you to write down all the ways God has blessed you. Past, in the current state of where you're at, why you're feeling just in a good place, and how you see God's blessing in your life. And once you get done doing that, what we're going to do, we're going to have you with your microchurch leaders take some time just to share with one another what it is that you're lamenting about, to read that, to express that to one another, so we can pray for one another and we can minister to the needs of one another. Thank you.